Hello, True Health Seeker, and welcome to another exciting episode of the Learn True Health podcast. If you have blood sugar issues and you're looking to finally resolve them, I would love to work with you. Please go to bloodsugarcoach.com, put in your information, and you'll be able to book a free 30-minute session with me, and we can see how I can help you. I have personally resolved my own type 2 diabetes. I am no longer a diabetic, and I did so with natural medicine. In the last 6 years, I've gone on to help a lot of people to also completely resolve their blood sugar issues so that they now have normal blood sugar. So if you'd like to no longer have blood sugar issues, please go to bloodsugarcoach.com. That's bloodsugarcoach.com. I look forward to working with you and enjoy today's episode. Welcome to the Learn True Health podcast. I'm your host, Ashley James. This is episode 203. I am so excited for today's guest. In fact, I was just so moved to know that Kristie Middleton would be on the show today, and I'm pretty sure that everyone's going to want to go vegan after hearing what Kristie has to say. I still eat meat, but I have over the years changed my diet so much because of the farming practices and the horrific things I see, and also the impact on the environment. I've shifted my diet to be more thoughtful of animals and the environment, and at the end of the day, I feel better and I'm healthier for it. And Kristie's here today to share with us why we could really help ourselves and the environment and animals by eating a way that is meatless, which I know scares a lot of people. So Kristie, I hope you can bring some shed some light on this topic and help us not be so afraid of potentially eating a more plant-based diet.
Well, Ashley, thank you so much for having me on. And I grew up eating meat, so I can definitely understand how it can seem overwhelming. But one of the things that I found was that when I adopted a vegetarian and then later a vegan diet, that I really was introduced to a whole nother world of food. So we have a lot of exciting things to talk about today.
Wonderful. And I'd love to start by you sharing your story because I'm really excited for people to learn what you do professionally, but also learn what led you to where you are today, to the advocate that you are and the author that you are. I'd love for you to share both personally and professionally your story.
Well, I'm really fortunate that my professional and my personal passions really line up very well. But I grew up in Chesapeake, Virginia, which is on the southern border of the state, so borders North Carolina. And I had an older sister, Jennifer. Jennifer and I grew up with three dogs. Their names were Pete, Tinkerbell, and Casey. And they were members of our family who I just remember caring about so deeply. We used to ride our bikes around the neighborhood, and little Tinkerbell would be there with us, or we'd put her in our basket on our bicycle, or we would be vegging out in front of MTV, which was new at the time. And these animals were right there with us. So I always cared about animals, but it wasn't until I was in college when a marketing professor was describing euphemisms, and she used meat as her example. And the example that she gave was that if we weren't using the term meat to kind of sanitize what we're really eating, which is the flesh of dead animals, probably a lot fewer people would want to eat meat. And I don't know that it was her intention, but those words really stuck with me because after that, every time I would sit down to eat, whether it was a chicken sandwich or a ham sandwich, a hamburger, I would think, this isn't just meat. This is the flesh of an animal. So I became vegetarian, but even then, I knew nothing about factory farming. I didn't realize how we are institutionally abusing billions of animals and giving them very little regard for what's in their best interest. When I learned all of those things, and I'd be happy to share a little bit more about that as we discuss this. That's when I decided to become vegan and to devote my life to helping animals. And I've been very fortunate to have been on this career path since I graduated from college, working for a variety of animal nonprofits and humane societies. And I've now been working for the Humane Society of the United States for nearly 8 years. And I'm so excited about the work that this team does. What I do in my daily job is I work with a team of incredible professionals, and we help institutions like schools, hospitals, colleges and universities, the military and correctional facilities, really any type of institution that serves meals. We help them with adding more plant based options to their menus and reducing the overall number of animals that they're using within their food system.
Oh, that is so cool. I have to say that every animal, I'm a big pet lover. Every animal we've ever had has been from, that I've ever had has been from the Humane Society. I grew up in Canada, and I have fond memories volunteering at the Humane Society in Bracebridge, which is about 2 hours north of Toronto. Just I love animals, and I agree with you that when you fall in love with an animal, there's no way you can eat it. So,
Right.
but what I was shocked by is, well, these videos in the last 10 years that have come up on YouTube where workers on the farms, these factory farms, will have hidden cameras and they'll show the abuse, and they'll show, the really poor conditions that these animals live in. Animals experience, emotions. They can feel pain. If you've ever had a pet, you know this. And you see what the pigs go through and what the cows go through and the chickens go through. And that's why, that's I think why the people are more likely to now buy their eggs that are pasture raised, or that there's no cages, because we don't, we don't want to harm the animal if they're giving us eggs. We don't want to think about all the torture they go through, but on some level, on some energetic or spiritual or karmic level, we must be absorbing that. I mean, they show that the meat from an animal that has been tortured, like they are in factory farms, has all the adrenaline and has the fear. And when we eat that, we're also getting that. So, on a health level, is there anything you can share that could help people scientifically understand on the health level, eating factory farm meat is less healthy?
Yeah, I mean, there are so many answers that I have to that question, Ashley. But you're absolutely right. I think that most people are compassionate and they're kind, and I don't know this just anecdotally, but rather there's evidence from consumer polling. So there was polling that was done by the American Farm Bureau Federation. That was conducted in conjunction with some students, and they found that 95% of consumers that they polled said that they cared that animals on farms should be well taken care of. And these are not just animals. I mean, we're talking about animals who were destined for our place, that people still felt like they should be well cared for. So we innately want animals to be well cared for, but there's this very big disconnect between what consumers want and what is the reality for the vast majority of animals who are caught up in our food system. So, for example, you mentioned egg laying hens. The vast majority of egg laying hens that are used in food production in the United States and Canada and other developing nations are coming from animals who are confined in tiny wire cages. They're called battery cages. And these cages are about the size of a desk drawer.
Mm.
There are 5 to 8 birds who are confined in a single cage, and they're unable to do anything that's natural or important to them. They're confined in those cages for about 18 months until their productivity wanes, and then they're eventually sent off to slaughter. So I now live in Oakland, California, and my next door neighbors have a couple of chickens. And I've been the very fortunate recipient of their many visits because I put out food for the squirrels, and it started falling on the ground, and the chickens discovered that there was food on the ground, so they come over almost daily to ask for some food. And it's really given me the opportunity to get to know these two animals, there's Goldie and Red, as individuals who have very distinct personalities. Goldie is very outgoing. She's not shy at all. She can be a little grumpy sometimes if I don't give her the right kind of food or the amount of food that she wants. Whereas Red is very patient. She's pretty docile. That alone just showed me this window into their personalities. And I think of these two animals who are very clearly unique individuals who have desires, who come and visit me and ask for food, and then they go back to their yard where they take a dust bath, which is their way of keeping their feathers clean. And then at the end of the day, They just know when it's time to go into their coop, and they get up on a perch where they sleep at night, and that's where they're safe from predators. And that's something that is something that's genetic to them. It was sort of came from their descendants of the red jungle fowl. So it came from their ancestors who would sleep high up in trees at night to keep safe from predators. So I share all of this just to share the stark contrast with the way that we are abusing the vast majority of animals who are caught up in our food system. And so you mentioned some of the ill health effects of this, in addition to potentially ingesting the products of animals who were abused. We're also talking about animals who are raised in these intensive conditions, which is ripe for disease. You know, if we're raising hundreds of thousands of animals in one single barn, that means if one of them has salmonella, it's much easier for others to get salmonella. And salmonella and campylobacter, these are some of the leading causes of undiagnosed distress in our gastrointestinal system, diarrhea, vomiting, all of these things. We get food poisoning, we don't really know where it comes from. Well, it's often salmonella, campylobacter, things that we're getting from factory farms like egg-laying houses or broiler houses where broiler chickens are confined. So there are lots of health consequences that we are experiencing as a result of the way that we're confining billions of animals in the United States alone.
Very interesting. You bring up a really good point that if someone maybe is a meat eater and they're like, I'm never gonna stop eating my steak. I love meat, which I can totally understand. I can get that mentality or that fear of being a vegan because like what I eat meat at every meal. So for those people thinking about that, animals who are factory farm raised, not only are incredibly sad, in pain, and abused, but they also are so much prone to infection because if you've driven by any factory farm, for cattle, it is disgusting. They are just basically having to stand on top of each other. There's almost no room, and there's just feces everywhere. The stench is overwhelming. It burns your lungs when you drive by, and these cows have to live in that their entire life, and because of the conditions, they have so much more infections, and so they're given so much more medication, which of course then passes on to you when we eat the animal. I remember my husband and I, when we lived in Vegas about 2008, we started to get into the health movement. We started to like go, how could we be healthier? We had all these minor health problems that added up and made us feel so uncomfortable, and we didn't want to go down the route of one drug after another. We started watching, food documentaries came out. Food Inc. we saw in the movie theaters in 2008, and a bunch of food documentaries were coming out on Netflix, and just Netflix had just started streaming movies, and they showed videos of animals, on farms where they got to roam free, organic farms, and they were treated wonderfully versus these other factory farms, which are really unfortunate situations. You wouldn't wish that upon anyone. And the health of the animals, and then the health that could be passed down to us. And we realized that after we ate food from this taco shop down the street that used obviously like the lowest grade meat possible, that our hearts, both my husband and I, our hearts would pound heavily for hours. We'd have like a carne asada from this taco shop, and our hearts would just be pounding. But if we bought the organic, really, like higher quality meat that was fairly raised, we bought it from Whole Foods, we didn't have that problem. And it was interesting that anytime we would eat low quality meat, our hearts would pound. Like we really ingested the adrenaline and the chemicals and the fear of that animal. Have you heard of that before?
I have, but another thing that that you may have been experiencing is that these animals, because they are intensively confined, are often fed high doses of antibiotics.
Mm.
And so, in fact, about 80% of antibiotics that we use in the United States go to treat animals non-therapeutically, meaning that they're just dosed with an ongoing dose of antibiotics to prevent them from actually getting sick, or in some instances, diseases to aid with quick growth. And so we're consuming antibiotics often if we're eating factory farmed meat or other animal products, and we may not even realize it. And in addition to that, having unknown impacts to our own health, it's leading to antibiotic resistance, meaning that the antibiotics that we're taking, we're just becoming so used to that they're not actually having the effects that they're intended to have. We become resistant to them, and that leads to strains of superbugs or things that we just can't fight off because they're resistant to the antibiotics. So there are lots of unintended consequences of the way that we're currently farming animals, in addition to the animal welfare abuses that we talked about, in addition to antibiotic resistance or the health impacts. We also know that it's having those ill effects on our environment that you talked about. Factory farms, animal agribusiness are responsible for, according to the United Nations, 14.5% of all human created greenhouse gas emissions. So you mentioned the air pollution associated with the factory farms. That's largely the methane gases that are being released by ruminants, but there are also other greenhouse gases that are the animal agribusiness is leading to, in addition to it being a very big user of resources like land, like water, fertilizer to raise the grain that we then transport and feed to the animals. So lots of impacts of factory farming on the environment as well as our health.
And I've seen footage where they have had whistleblowers share that these red lakes or these pink lakes that are beside the pork houses are all the runoff from the waste from the pigs, and what they do is they spray it into the air with like if you go to a golf course, you see these giant grass sprayers watering the grass. I can't remember the word for it, but that's what they do. They spray it into the air, and so that they can get rid of it because they have nowhere to put it. And then miles down the road, people are getting so sick because they're inhaling. It's aerosoled, basically feces from the pigs from these giant pig factory farms, and there's whole towns that are getting sick, and they're having these fights to try to shut it down. But these big companies, these big corporations, just lawyer up instead of be responsible or consider the impact that it has on the local towns. And there's also these farms where all the chemicals that they have to use end up leaching into the soil and getting into our water table. So yeah, they're not raising these animals to give us better health. They're raising these animals to make money, and ultimately they're cutting so many corners. It's harming us. And the fact that even just the fact alone that this style of farming could cause superbugs, that alone should be the reason why we stop buying this meat, right? Because if I'm consuming this meat and I'm getting these antibiotics into me, that's killing my gut flora and making it so that if I do get an infection, that it turns into a superbug and it's resistant. That is very scary. That's obviously life threatening, and we could all avoid that if we vote with our fork and we either choose to go meatless or choose to support the farms that don't do these practices.
Right. And I think, to your point, Ashley, I think most people just don't know about it. And one of the things that I think has been tremendous from social media, from Netflix, the documentaries that are out there that are pulling back the curtain on these practices that I think the vast majority of consumers would be horrified to know were happening, that were routine in our food system. So in my book, which is called Meatless, I share the story of a woman and her family who the Humane Society helped. Her name is Lita, and she and her husband bought a plot of property in the Central Valley of California. And for your listeners who aren't familiar with the area, it's about 40 or so miles east of the San Francisco area, but it's one of the most burdened agricultural areas in the country. So that's where a lot of the California grown produce is coming from, but there are also a lot of animal farms in the Central Valley as well. So you would never know that this huge agricultural area is not that far from San Francisco. But Lita and her husband, they bought a plot of land. They wanted to raise their family true village style in Lathrop, California. There was a small egg farm down the street from their house, and it was later bought out by Oliver Egg Ranch. And I think to most people, that would conjure images of a barn with some chickens pecking the ground on some rolling green hills, but the reality was dramatically different. Those cages that I described before, which are these tiny wire mesh cages that confine 5 to 8 birds in a single cage, well, there were several of those barns on the property right down the street from Lita's house, and they housed about 700,000 egg laying hens. So it was a travesty for the animals, but it was also for Lita and her neighbors an environmental nightmare because the way that this egg factory farm disposed of its waste is the standard in animal agribusiness, and that is that they would put the manure out in a giant lagoon, which is essentially just a cesspool of untreated waste that was just a stone's throw from her house and her neighbors' houses. And this just sat there completely untreated. And if it gets hot outside, just imagine how horrible that would smell. Sometimes the air was so thick with the ammonia fumes that it caused their eyes to burn, it caused their lungs to burn. They would be nauseated and they'd get headaches. And who knows what the untold consequences of that were, the things that they don't know will affect them later on. In addition, the fly infestations were so bad, sometimes they couldn't even open their windows. So the Humane Society sued on behalf of Lita and her neighbors, and we were able to get a settlement out of court. But the thing is, that's still the way that animal agribusiness disposes of its waste. In many instances, the pig factory farms, as you described, are well known in North Carolina. Sometimes they have hurricanes. I grew up on the East Coast, so I know that every single year we would have tropical storms or hurricanes. And when those storms blow through and those manure lagoons overflow, where do you think that water goes?
Mm.
The wastewater. It goes out into the streams, into the rivers, causing all kinds of environmental damage, killing off fish and anything in the path. And it also causes wastewater issues. It flows into our water tables. It's just tragic for the people who have to live around it. It's tragic for the environment that's trying to absorb all of these contaminants. And that's just one example. So there are all kinds of unintended consequences of our factory farming system.
So what can we do? I think at this point people are starting to go, wait a second. This isn't I don't want this anymore. What can we do? If we get enough people, like I said, vote with our fork, we can change. Because if everyone or the majority of everyone stops buying this meat, they will have to, businesses have to change or die. Like think about Blockbuster. Or didn't you love in the 90s going to Blockbuster? Wasn't that like so much fun to go and get a Blockbuster movie? Where's Blockbuster now? They didn't adapt. Everyone wanted the desires of the consumer changed, and that business did no longer is around. Other businesses like Netflix were able to anticipate our desire, and our dollars went from Blockbuster to Netflix, and that's why Netflix is still here. As an example, we can do that as consumers. We could vote with our fork, and if we got enough of us and shared this information and spread it, we could help enough people. We could get enough people together so that these businesses either went out of business or they shifted gears to accommodate our new desires. So what can we do? What are the first steps that we should take?
Well, the Humane Society advocates the 3 R's, and what we mean by that is reducing, replacing, and refining. So we recommend reducing overall meat consumption, replacing meat or other animal products with plant-based foods, and refining our diet by choosing, if we do continue to eat meat and other animal products, choosing them from higher welfare sources, such as from systems that don't confine egg laying hens in those tiny cages or mother pigs in gestation crates. My book, MeatLess, I talk about making gradual changes. So I'm personally vegan, But I didn't become vegan overnight. As I described, I became vegetarian. I stopped eating eggs when I was a little girl. So I became vegetarian, but then it took me about a year and a half before I became vegan. And I know for a lot of people, if you've been eating a certain way your entire life, the idea of becoming even vegetarian may seem overwhelming. So we encourage people to make small steps that will add up to become a big difference. And maybe you'll feel good at starting to do a meatless Monday. That's a huge step in the right direction. And then perhaps you'll be open to adding more meat-free days into your repertoire. But even if we all just went meat-free 1 day a week, it would mean over 1 billion animals spared from factory farms. If we all stopped eating chicken, even just one meal once a week, it'd be like taking 500,000 cars off of US roads. That's just one meal of chicken. If we could just skip that once a week, it would still add up to make a huge difference. So I think the first step is just identifying one way that you could reduce in your diet and then replace those meals with delicious plant-based meals.
All right, let's talk about reducing. What tips or tricks do you have for reducing meat? So you've got meatless Monday. I love that. Or skipping chicken for one meal a week. What? Then the next one would be replacing. But do you have any other tips for reducing that we should consider?
Sure. Well, I'll fill you in a little bit more on Meatless Monday. So, if your listeners aren't familiar with this concept, it's actually been around for a very long time. It initiated during World War I as a resource conservation campaign by the US government. A lot of people didn't realize that bit of trivia, but it was done back then because the troops in the US, I'm sorry, the troops abroad were asking that Americans conserve their resources. So, eat meat free 1 day a week to support the troops abroad. And then it was brought back during World War II for the same reason. And then again in 2003, the Johns Hopkins School of Public Health teamed up with an organization called the Monday Campaigns, this time to fight a different war, the war on chronic preventable disease, and to improve environmental sustainability. So since then, millions of people have pledged to go meat free on Monday, including Paul McCartney, who has his own Meat Free Monday campaign in the UK. Dozens of colleges and universities, hundreds of school districts, and many, many more institutions all over the world are doing Meatless Monday. It's not just relegated to the United States, but rather, I believe now 32 countries are participating in this program. In addition to that, there are things like vegan before six, which is a term that was coined rather by Mark Bittman, who is the New York Times best-selling author of a book by that name, Vegan Before Six. So he did it because he was overweight and he was experiencing a host of health issues, and his doctor told him to try a plant-based diet. And he didn't feel like he could go 100%, but he decided to eat meat free and eat a plant-based diet at least and for his breakfast and lunch, and that would mean that at least two-thirds of his meals throughout the day would be vegan. If he felt like continuing the trend throughout the evening, then he would eat vegan for dinner, but he might eat a familiar food or a favorite food as well. So those are just a couple of ideas, but I go through a lot of tips in my book, Meatless, and the whole concept is to commit to something that feels doable for you. So when I was working on the book, I teamed up with a friend and colleague, Dr. Melena Eschrich, who is a clinical psychologist who specialized in behavior change. And one of the things that she pointed out is that oftentimes this change just seems so big and overwhelming. If we've eaten a certain way our whole life, to try to change all of that might feel like a lot. And so we just need to kind of sort it down into bite-sized chunks. Start out with the Meatless Monday, or even decide you're going to replace a favorite meal with a plant-based approximation. So if you love eating bean or rice and beef burritos, so swap them out with beans and see if that will work for you. So another idea is to use a meatless Monday or use your desire to eat more plant-based meals by experimenting with new foods. So when I became vegan, it really just opened me up to a whole new world of foods. I had never tried sushi until I became vegan. Believe it or not, there's all kinds of delicious vegetarian sushi. I love avocado rolls. You can get asparagus rolls, carrot rolls, cucumber rolls. I never tried Ethiopian food until I became vegan, or Thai or Indian food for that matter. So it could be a way to explore international cuisines, or just add a new recipe to your repertoire. But there are all kinds of delicious plant-based foods, and I love eating, I love cooking, so I could talk about this for hours.
Oh, well, me too. Total foodie here. I really like your concept of easing into it because I think it's such a shock to people's systems and their psyche when they just go cold turkey, pun intended. And I've seen it before where these I have a friend who has a whole family who watched one of those documentaries about about 2 years ago, a documentary that was just released on Netflix. I'm forgetting the name right now, but basically by the end of it you are going vegan. Like it's the and they give you a 30-day like no meat challenge. And so the whole family did it, and after a few days they were grumpy, they were just like tearing the wallpaper off the walls. They didn't know how to transition, right? They didn't take the time to replace one meal after another and figure out how to do it. So they just ended up hungry and pissy, and within a week they were eating meat again, and kind of feeling really guilty about it. But the although it was an inspirational documentary, it gave them no resources for baby steps so that they could have sustained success. And I'm hearing that your book Meatless really does consider that.
Right. In fact, I share the story of a family who had the exact same experience. So I learned about this family from a colleague of mine who saw the film Super Size Me. I don't know if you remember seeing that one, but
Yes.
the Morgan Spurlock documentary, for those of your listeners who haven't seen it, he decides to go on an all McDonald's for a month diet, eating it for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. And as you can imagine, experiences some pretty severe health consequences. In the film, they also show some factory farming footage. And so the man who I mentioned in the book shares that after he saw that documentary, he talked to his then wife and still wife, but now they have a whole family. But at the time, it was just the two of them. And he was like, "Baby, we got to go vegetarian." And so they became vegetarian. And he said they actually were able to stick with it for about 8 months until they were going to Japan to visit her family. And they were worried about how it would feel to show up and say, "Well, we don't eat certain foods." So they started incorporating meat back into their diet. And then once they got back to the US, they just continued eating meat. A couple of years later, this point, they had a couple of kids. His wife saw the documentary Food Inc. and said, "Baby, we got to go vegetarian." So it was her this time, and they tried it for a while. And they found that with two kids, busy work schedules, that they just couldn't stick with it. So they ended up hearing about Meatless Monday by attending a Humane Society gala, and they thought, that's something that we can do. It feels like a goal that we could actually stick with because what they found is, like you said, once they fell off the wagon, they stayed off the wagon and they felt really guilty about it. And we know that guilt is not a motivator for people, that we have to give people tools that will actually help them work and feel confident like they can do it. So they heard about Meatless Monday and they decided that's something we could actually do. In addition to that, how about every single day, at least one of our meals will also be meat free, whether it's breakfast, lunch, or dinner. And so they started doing that. They found that they could stick with it. Turns out their kids' school actually does Meatless Monday, so their kids knew about it as well.
Hmm.
And it's been about 2 years now, and they're still doing Meatless Monday. And they found that in addition to that, they often eat meals without meat throughout the week. And if they do eat meat, it's significantly less than they would have eaten before. The portions are smaller and they're using it as a garnish or just to flavor their food a little bit rather than as a center of the plate item.
Mm-hmm. That's such a great strategy. I love it. That's and there's a fear as a parent. Like I can't get my kids to eat vegetables. How am I going to get them to eat anything? But one thing that I've really observed through watching other moms that have come before me is that I like one of my friends who now has a 9-year old. I've known him since he was about 4 years old, and he would not eat any vegetables. The parents had to like do homemade like chicken nuggets and like like mash the broccoli into the meat and like hide it into the meat so that they could get something into him that was a vegetable. But when they grew a garden and they have a very small front yard, At one point, they lived in an apartment and they had a balcony. But when they started to grow food, and the child was involved in the growing of food, and so he went to the store, he picked out the seeds, he planted the seeds, he watered them every day, he weeded that little patch of garden. He was willing to eat whatever vegetable that he grew. And then he got to be part of the process of picking it, going into the garden, picking it, washing it, cutting it up, cooking it, or putting it into a salad. And now he eats any vegetable you could imagine. But a few years ago, it was the child that never eats vegetables. And I've seen this over and over again, that children really, when they're involved in the process, they'll eat it. And it's that we haven't, like, back in our grandmother's age, or our maybe our mother's age, they would cook in the kitchen, and generation would pass down the information to generation. I cooked in the kitchen when I was a child with my grandmother. But now so many people don't have that, and so they don't have the experience of touching the food. They eat out all the time, or they eat processed food. That's another barrier to eating a more vegan or vegetarian plant-based diet, is the fear, I don't know how to cook, right? So taking that baby step would allow them to get over that overwhelm, I imagine. Do you have recipes in your book?
Oh boy, do I. Yes. Yeah. So the latter half of the book is recipes. Some of them are my own recipes that are just really simple favorites of mine. And then others are from a friend who was a CIA Culinary Institute of America trained chef. So hers are a little more complicated, although she has a lot that are really simple. But I love to cook. I also get a CSA box, so that's community supported agriculture. It's a box of produce that I get every single week. And what I love about that is that it's all in season produce and it's locally grown from a California farm. And it helps me with experimenting with new food. So I get
Mm-hmm.
things that I would have never picked up at the grocery store or at the farmer's market, like rutabaga. I got that this week, and I'm like, what am I going to do with rutabaga? Because I would have never picked that out myself, but now I'm going to try it. Or celery root, or all kinds of other
Mm.
produce that are things that maybe people are familiar with, but a lot of folks aren't. And it really just helps with adding some variety to your diet and also enabling you to do a little bit of experimentation.
I totally agree with you. I love the community supported agriculture boxes. I think it's a great concept. Most people in cities can get one. And it's I love the concept of local, because it's fresh. The nutrients are rich. It's sort of like going to a farm. If you don't have the ability to go to a farmer's market, it's like someone went to a farmer's market for you, put it in a box, and surprise, this is what you get to eat this week. Parsnips were my challenge. You know that those cooking shows where it's like, I can't remember the name of it, but it's like a mystery box challenge, and they put all the ingredients in, and then there's a big question on the box, and you lift up the box. You have 30 minutes to cook something, and you have no idea what these ingredients are. I may have heard of a parsnip, but I've never seen it. I must have always just like blindly passed it in the vegetable section of the grocery store. And I had so much fun cooking with these new, like rutabaga, like you said, parsnip for me, cooking with these new ingredients and figuring out how to incorporate them. And I never cooked something I didn't like. I always cooked delicious meals from these mystery vegetables that were fresh and local. So I love that concept. Even if it's just to augment your grocery shopping, you don't have to like replace 100% of your vegetables with it, because you might not always get what you want. Like if you want
Mhm.
spinach, you might always get spinach. But it does force us to be a bit creative in the kitchen, right? Because it's like, hey, this is new, or I wasn't expecting this. Um, or you might get rhubarb right now, and it's like, wow, I've never cooked with rhubarb. This is going to be fun. You can make some delicious things with rhubarb, and you would have never bought it in the store, but now that you have it in your box, your surprise weekly or bi-weekly local box, then you can have a lot of fun with it. Another thing you talked about, the meatless Mondays coming from World War I. I got into canning and food preservation a few years ago, and learned all about the victory gardens
Mhm.
in World War I and World War II, and how big of a difference it made in not only supporting the war efforts, but also in the health of the Canadians, the Australians, the British, and the Americans. They all participated in these victory gardens, and so having a little patch where you grow when you can, where you grow some food. I think when we have something fresh and we can see it and we can touch it, it makes us more excited to cook with it. Something I've heard and I've done is I used to always buy a meat. I'm sure you probably say this in your book, but it's like we get steak. We go, okay, I'm gonna make steak. What am I gonna pair with the steak? Okay, I've got some potatoes.
Hmm.
Whereas it's if we switch our mentality to, oh, I've got this wonderful fresh cauliflower. What am I going to do with this cauliflower? And so we start thinking of the centerpiece of the meal being the vegetable or being the legume. Then meat might end up being a side dish or like if we're not getting rid of it completely. And that takes that takes the overwhelm away as well, right? Because we can focus on the center of the meal being this wonderful vegetable or this wonderful plant-based nutrient, and then go from there and build the meal from there.
You're absolutely right about that. And it's something that I'm really excited to see coming out of the culinary world now. So, most of the work that I do on a day to day basis is changing or helping change institutional menus rather than changing individual diets. And that's really as a result of our trying to be most efficient with our time. So, if we can get one school district or one hospital to add more plant based options to its menus, then it's going to have a massive impact for animals, for its guests, who then will hopefully, on an individual basis, start eating more of those foods at home as well. But one of the things that I found through this program called Menus of Change, it's a partnership with the Culinary Institute of America and the Harvard School of Public Health, is what they call the flipped plate concept. They're essentially saying make meat the side of your plate, make fruits, vegetables, whole grains, plant proteins the center of your plate. So it's really crowding out the food that we should be eating less of for health or for sustainability reasons, and focusing on the world of vegetables and legumes and all these other delicious disease um, fighting, health promoting foods that we are not eating enough of in our society and that we need to be eating more of. And I think that that whole idea of really trying to feature new foods, new fruits and vegetables, or experimenting with things, especially within the culinary community, is very exciting.
Now, depending on someone's size, or whether they're a male or female, and depending on what time they are in their life, they say that we should be eating between 50 grams and 120 grams of protein a day. What would you suggest people use? So, like if they're going to do their meatless Mondays, or if they're going to replace the animal protein with a plant-based protein, what are some fun proteins that you would suggest we go for? And like everyone knows tofu, right? But not everyone knows that pumpkin seeds are a fantastic source of protein. Do you have any other surprising protein sources that are wonderful to implement in a vegan diet?
Yeah, so, I guess to your point about protein, though, we have this obsession with protein. And really, I think that most people don't even know what it is. They just think we need it and we need lots of it. But as you said, we really only need about 45 grams of protein a day for women, 55 grams for men. For really bodybuilding, we want to build a lot of muscle, then we need more of it than that. And it depends on where you are in your life stage as well. But protein, I think, is an often overemphasized nutrient that is one that most people are getting plenty of, whether they're vegetarian or vegan, or if they're eating meat, they're probably eating way too much protein. And typically, what happens when we eat too much protein is that we're also eating too much saturated fat and too much cholesterol. That said, with the obvious tofu, as you mentioned, beans, legumes are great sources of protein. You get about 8 grams of protein and about half a cup or one serving. And you can eat, well, I mean, I can eat beans all day. And, it's something that your body adjusts to the more you eat of them. Nut butters are a fantastic source of protein, whether it's peanut butter, almond butter, cashew butter. There are all kinds of nut butters and spreads. But really, you can get protein almost any food that you're eating, so long as it's a good whole food, and it really builds up quickly as long as you're eating a balanced diet. One of my favorite meals to make that's really simple and easy is an Asian nut butter type of dish where it's just noodles with peanut sauce. So you make a very simple peanut sauce from peanut butter and a few other ingredients. You can make noodles or use store-bought noodles, but you can use gluten-free noodles, or you can use whole wheat, whatever your favorite noodles are. Use those. Toss in some frozen steamed vegetables or fresh steamed vegetables. It's very colorful, it's really nutrient dense, it's filling, and it can be ready in about 10 minutes. So it's a dish that I love to make, and it's also really delicious. But I think that the bottom line is we can get all the nutrients we need as long as we're eating a well-balanced diet. And I don't honestly even plan my meals around the nutrients that I'm getting. I just eat a lot of really beautiful dishes with lots of color. That's what I mean by beautiful. It's not like everything is Instagram worthy, but just eating lots of colors and trying to ensure that I'm eating a diversity of foods throughout the day. And my blood levels are all good. I'm below your average cholesterol level, and I feel very healthy. I'm very active as well.
Wonderful. Now, I have a little weird question, and this is something that is kind of like uh, I've been pondering about for quite some time. As a vegan, obviously, every vegan I know loves animals and has like a million pets. Like, it's par for the core. So you obviously have to buy canned meat, or you have to buy animal food for your dog or for your cat. That in of itself is buying meat.
Mhm.
What do you do to, obviously you can't feed your cat a vegan diet. That would be harmful to them. That's not what their body needs. What do you do as a vegan to ensure that your purchases are healthy purchases for the planet, and for sustainability and for animal welfare when you're buying pet food?
Yeah, it's a really good question, and I will just kind of back into it by saying that what I believe in is progress and not perfection. So that's why I advocate for meat reduction. Even though I'm vegan, I want to acknowledge that it's not about being 100% vegan or 100% pure. It's about trying to reduce the most suffering that we can, and recognize that everybody is on a different spectrum, or they're at a different place along their journey. And so I don't want people to think, oh, well, if I'm going to do meatless Monday, it means I have to turn my dog or cat into a vegetarian. So that's why I want to preface it with that. That said, it is a very legitimate question and a concern that I have, as somebody who is trying to make the most ethical choices that I can. It doesn't stop when I go to the pet store. So my dog actually is on a vegetarian diet. Dogs are not obligate carnivores. They can actually get all their nutrient needs met by a vegetarian diet. If a stranger wants to give them a biscuit that has meat in it, that's okay. He's not pure. And he may eat meat every once in a while, but I feed him a vegetarian kibble, and then often I'll make him some. I have an Instapot, so I might make him some kind of stew to add some variety to it. And then we also give him canned vegetarian dog food. Now, I'll let you talk to him about whether or not he likes it, but he's very healthy. We're very active. We go hiking almost every day, and he's got a beautiful coat, very physically active, very handsome dog. My cats, I feed them vegetarian kibble, but I feed them meat canned food. So they're not on a 100% vegetarian diet because, as you said, they couldn't thrive on that. They're not meant for that, and it would be irresponsible of me to feed them a 100% vegan diet. So I cut the meat in their diet by giving them some vegetarian food and then feeding them some meat. And when I do feed them meat, I try to choose it from the biggest animals possible because my concern is ensuring that fewer animals are suffering. So I would choose like beef or bison. So one animal who's going to be feeding many, many, many cats.
Oh, that's an interesting concept. I like it. Well, your animals haven't gone out and tried to eat the neighbor chickens.
They've not.
So
They coexist
they
peacefully.
they yes, they must be happy, because I think if an unhappy dog or cat would have already eaten the your wonderful chickens. Was it Rooster and Red? I can't remember their
Yeah.
names. Yeah.
Goldie and Red,
Goldie
yes,
and Red,
and
that's it.
They come over, and it's peaceable kingdom. My dog is 65 pounds. He's not a little guy, but he's also very docile. And the cats, so we'll be in the yard, and there will be chicken, cat, dog, squirrels, jays. Sometimes I feel like Snow White.
Do you ever catch your dog doing yoga? You know those dogs that do yoga? I imagine if you get a dog to go vegan, like the next step is yoga, right?
Yeah, he's not quite there yet.
That's very cool. Another movie I've got to point out is Temple Grandin. I was so inspired, and I watched it over the summer. I couldn't believe didn't know about it sooner. But Temple Grandin is a wonderful story. I mean, she's an amazing woman, but her story is amazing. I can't remember whether I streamed it on Netflix or for whether it was Amazon Prime. Highly recommend listeners watching it. It's not so much about going vegan, but she revolutionized the cattle industry and made it more humane when leading the cattle to slaughter, so they weren't hurting themselves and drowning through the process. Do you have anything that you'd like to say about Temple Grandin or her role in making the animal industry more, or the food industry more humane?
Yeah, she's definitely been a pioneer in trying to improve animal welfare at slaughter. And it's something that I think is really difficult for people to think about. But that it's a reality. If we're eating meat, animals have died to get there. And previously, she's helped a lot of major food companies with addressing the slaughter issue. And as you mentioned, created some systems where, for example, cows who are highly intelligent, highly sensitive, like all animals, would see the animals before them being hung upside down and having their throat slit. So she created systems where they would be in a chute that was not a straight chute so that the animals couldn't see others before them being slaughtered. So she's definitely been a real pioneer in improving animal welfare within the food system. She's also been very strong opponent of some of the practices that we have also been fighting against, like the intensive confinement of mother pigs in gestation crates, which are these essentially iron maidens that prevent mother pigs from even turning around during their pregnancy. So mother pigs are confined in these crates for their gestation period, which is about 4 months. They're put into another crate to give birth and then put back into the gestation crate. And in these crates, they can't even turn around. So just imagine being in a crate, not just being in a crate and being healthy, but being in a crate and being pregnant and being unable to even turn around. So that's the system that was ubiquitous throughout the US pork industry, the Canadian pork industry, and many global pork industries. It's now been a practice that the United Nations has banned. I'm sorry, not the United Nations, the European Union has banned. Also, several US states have outlawed it. And many major food companies, through the work of the Humane Society and other animal protection organizations, have said that they want to move away from those gestation crates within their supply chain. But Temple Grandin has come out against them, saying that it would be like having to live your entire life while sitting in an airplane seat. And as a frequent flyer, I can tell you that it's not comfortable to sit in an airplane seat for a few hours, let alone your entire life. So we're very glad to have her support on that issue.
Absolutely. I mean, it is so unhealthy. There's a fear of blood clots, for example, just if a human is sitting that long in an airplane seat. Can you imagine an animal their entire life and all the medication that they have to give the animal, like all the antibiotics, just to prevent illness, because it's so unhealthy, such an unhealthy situation for the animal to be in. My heart just goes out to them. Pigs are incredibly intelligent, and they're suffering, and there's millions of pigs suffering and millions of animals suffering needlessly. And that suffering is going to spill over into our suffering. It already has, because of the environmental impact, the local environmental impact, like the air, and the water supply and the soil. And then the infectious disease impact of now creating resistant bugs. So we create enough of this suffering, karma will happen, right? If we turn a blind eye, it will eventually catch up with us, and it's already started to harm us. But we can ignore it right now. There's going to come a point where we can't, and I'd rather us steer this ship in the right direction now before it's too late. You
Yeah.
talked about reducing, you talked about replacing. Let's talk a little bit about refining. So you said higher welfare sources if someone were to continue to eat meat, but do so in a more ethical way, a more responsible way. How can we access higher welfare sourced meat? Is it somewhere where, like, go to Whole Foods, they actually categorize the meat so you can see how that animal was treated, what conditions they were treated in. Are there other ways that we can buy meat where we know it is better for the environment, better for the animal?
Right. Well, labels can be very confusing. Whole Foods, the Global Animal Partnership, the step rating program that they have is one of the best out there because the minimum standards for animal ingredients that they sell have to ensure that the animals can, in the very least, engage in natural important behaviors. They don't use gestation crates or battery cages, or they don't allow those within their supply chain. There's a whole section in my book that actually came from the Humane Society's website on labels. So I encourage listeners who are concerned to check that out. It's just humanesociety.org, I believe, /labels or food labels. And it's all about what these labels mean because I think that they can be very confusing. For example, there are some companies that have in the past said that their chicken is cage free, as in their chicken meat. Well, all chicken meat is coming from cage-free hens, at least in the United States, because chickens raised for meat aren't confined in cages. So it's very misleading for consumers. However, chickens who are raised in egg production are, at least right now, the current system, that is the way that the vast majority of chickens are being raised for egg production. So in the very least, we recommend choosing eggs that come from hens who are not confined in cages. Beyond that, the welfare can improve depending on the system. Free range simply means that they have access to the outdoors. But if you're in a barn with 700,000 other birds and you have a tiny little 2 foot by 2 foot door, it's possible you're never going to get outdoors. Then there's pasture raised, which means that the animals are actually on an open pasture, typically with a movable trailer or other type of hen house that they can go into at night. Chickens are prey animals, and so they really like to have some kind of cover, like trees or bushes, or even that trailer that they can go underneath, rather than just being in the wide open in case there's a hawk or some other predator flying over. So very high welfare systems will also give them access to some type of cover as well. And then when it comes to pork, we recommend certainly choosing from farmers who are not using gestation crates. Using group housing in the very least is preferred. And then a more free range system where they can actually go outdoors and engage in their important natural behaviors like rooting around and wallowing in a mud bath or something like that. Whole Foods is a great place to go and find that. A lot of people ask about farmers markets, and farmers markets, even in California, could before a law that we worked on went into effect, could have been raising animals in factory farms. So you still want to ask if you go to the farmers market what sorts of practices they're using. And I think it's really important that if we are continuing to eat meat and animal products, that we do a little bit of homework and we decide for ourselves, are these conditions that the animals are being raised in, are these conditions that I would be comfortable with knowing that I'm supporting?
I love it. I love the work you're doing. I think it's so important, because the more we take the time to be humane with animals, we will also we also need to be humane with ourselves, with our own body, with our health, with the planet. I don't think you can just say I'm only humane with animals. It grows. It's like love. And so if we invest this time into being compassionate, it spills over. We're compassionate with our own health, with our own body, with nature, with the earth, with our community, and with animals. And we need to think holistically. We need to think about the ecology of the entire system. We can't think that we're being compassionate and loving and holistic and then be a part of the inhumane acts towards animals, just like we don't condone slavery. Well, this is in a way it's like slavery and torture of animals. And so we need to consider what is healthy for myself, my community, my environment, and the planet, and make choices that are in alignment with the ecology of everything, because that really then leads to wholeness spiritually, mentally, emotionally, and physically. So I love the work you're doing. I think it's so exciting. Your website, KristieMiddleton.com, in the show notes, the link to your website is going to be there. You have a great newsletter where you provide recipes. You also have a lot of recipes on your website and a blog. You have a lot of wonderful things on your website, and the link to buy your book MeatLess is also going to be in the show notes of today's podcast. Thank you so much for coming on the show. Is there anything that you would like to share with the listeners in closing?
Yeah, well, thank you so much. First of all, Ashley, it's been a lot of fun talking with you. And I think I would just, wrap up by saying one of the things that we didn't have time to talk about were the health benefits of eating a more plant-based diet. And I think that that's really one of the most compelling things that people are one of the most compelling reasons that people are adopting a more plant-based diet. The science supports that right now, our society is eating too much meat, too many animal products, and just not enough plant-based foods. So whether it's by doing a meatless Monday, going vegan before 6, or simply increasing the plants on your plate and reducing the amount of meat that you're eating, it's something that will definitely help us with achieving a more humane society as well as a more healthful society. And so I hope that your listeners will find more information on my own personal website or the Humane Society's website, which is humanesociety.org.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Kristie, for coming on the show.
Absolutely. It's been a lot of fun.
Enjoy what you heard today on your episode of the Learn True Health podcast. Did something move you, inspire you? Did you get great information that's going to change your life? Awesome. That's exactly what I'm here to do, is to help you gain your health back. Please turn around and share this. If this is something that's helped you in any way, share this with those you love. Love the Learn True Health podcast and want to support us? Awesome. You can go to takeyoursupplements.com and you can support us that way. You'll get access to amazing supplements that are just really great quality for a great price. And there'll be someone on the other end of the line to help you pick out your supplements that are right for you. That's takeyoursupplements.com. Or join our membership, learntruehealth.com/join. That's another great way to support our podcast, support our movement, and you'll be supporting yourself. Gain more information, wonderful videos, wonderful trainings, and you'll also be able to share those with those you love as well. So go to learntruehealth.com/join. Want something fun for free? Go to learntruehealth.com, and right there on the front page, you'll see where you can get our free cookbook. I spent a lot of time making it, and it was so much fun. It's really delicious, healthy recipes. And you can also get our 7-day doctor course. Right there, it's 7 days of naturopathic videos sent right to your inbox, and you can learn from top naturopaths on how to gain health naturally. So that's takeyoursupplements.com for wonderful supplements. learntruehealth.com/join to join our awesome membership, which is only open for a limited time. You can get our free healthy cookbook, and you can also get for free 7 days of wonderful naturopathic videos sent to you. Just go to learntruehealth.com and you'll see it right there on the front page. Thank you so much for being a listener, and thank you for sharing and helping others. Let's spread this information and turn this ripple into a tidal wave.